Okay, so now that we have you here, Ian, my topic for you, I wanted to talk about. So I saw this article on Polygon by Colin Campbell, and it stated the problem with walking sims. And there's been a lot of conjecture and talk about whether walking sims should be considered video games. He goes into it and states, in the past few years, a game genre has emerged that's found millions of fans. So-called walking sims like Dear Esther, Gone Home, Firewatch, and Virginia have extended the definition of games from physical and mental challenges to narrative experience that tease nuanced emotional responses from players. These games have also attracted plenty of criticism from people who refuse to recognize them as games due to their general lack of puzzle or physical manipulation elements. Then he goes on to actually have an interview with the guy one of the creators of Dear Esther, Dan Pinchbeck. And Dan Pinchbeck basically states that it doesn't matter if you understand it or it doesn't matter if you'll get it. It's not a problem to be solved. It's just a thing to be in for a while. Critics insist that a game is only a game if it presents some kind of challenge or a definitive fail state. Pinchbeck takes issue with this view while acknowledging the difficulty of hard and fast definitions. Maybe it's because I started playing games in the late 70s and early 80s. The stuff coming out was just completely crazy. People just trying stuff left, right, and center. It felt like games were always about questioning what could be. I think it's one of those things that once you start unpicking it, it starts coming apart at the seams. If it's all about a game having to have mechanics, well then you start to go, Space Invaders is less of a game than Far Cry because it has fewer mechanics. Or if a game is about having a fail state, then does that mean that if a game doesn't punish you like Far Cry for dying, or where death is pretty trivial, does that make it less of a game than Bloodborne, where the stakes for death are higher? Whichever way you come at it, you start unpicking both strands, and it doesn't really make sense apart from the feeling of what a game ought to do. So the reason I brought up this article is, like I stated before we started recording, Ian, I think you're really creative and artsy. I think you have a way of looking at games that maybe the average gamer or game journalist doesn't really look at games. And I know hearing you talk about Inside and other games, you have a real appreciation for games that try things and aren't just cookie cutter. I want to hear what your opinion is on walking sims and whether they should be considered games, and you think this whole argument's kind of dumb, really?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, Bloodborne is more of a game than Far Cry, so we can just put that one to bed.
Oh shit!
No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I mean, you sort of said this. The whole discussion is very strange to me. It's like, to the critics, I would just say, why does it matter? Why does it matter if you call this a video game or if you call it a movie where you hold W down to move forward? I mean, and there is a term for it, walking sim. Sure, fine, whatever, but what does it matter if you, how does it offend you that a walking sim exists? Would you rather there not be Dear Esther, not be Gone Home? You know?
Yeah.
But I mean, to actually talk about it, I mean, I think there's nothing wrong with a controlled experience. Dear Esther, I love Dear Esther. It has my favorite video game soundtrack of all time. And it does have game-like elements, to my understanding, where there's the A script, B script, C script thing, and it will load one or the other in different locations, so it changes slightly different playthroughs. I believe that's how that game works. And also, it's kind of a narrative puzzle, too. And I think that games are really unique in that, oftentimes one person can make a game. And when that's the case, you're not beholden to anyone else. No one is breathing down your neck. No studio is saying oh, well, you have to make this make sense to the masses, the Joe Schmo consumer. Dear Esther doesn't have a clear, narrative through line that's explained within the game itself. You have to kind of think about it and look at it, and there is a lot of room for interpretation. And I'm not saying that films like that don't get made, because obviously they do. I mean, think about Upstream Color, or any David Lynch film, or various myriad art films. But I think that if we outlawed or whatever games like Dear Esther or Gone Home, then a serious voice would be missing from video games. And I think the fact that you can't manipulate anything in Dear Esther, I don't think that's necessarily a problem, as long as that you kind of know, especially now, that's what you're getting into. when going into that. And I think, like, kind of in a funny way, if No Man's Sky had marketed themselves as kind of a walking simulator, like an art game without a necessary aim, yeah, it probably would have sold fewer copies by a lot, and it wouldn't have been as popular, but people wouldn't be pissed because that's what that game is.
That's a good point.
And because I don't know why, like, I had even when we had that like hilarious fight at game trailers during E3 when we were all screaming at each other like morons about No Man's Sky and like swearing at each other and standing up. We'd been streaming for 16 hours, so take it with that in mind. But like, if I remember, I haven't watched it again, but if I remember, my main thing was like, Jones's thing was, what do you do in that game? And he was saying, like, they never say what you do in that game.
Yeah.
And I mean, now there's a news story came out today that No Man's Sky is being investigated by the European Advertising Standards Authority, and it's like,
wow.
Yeah, and for false advertising, and that's insanity. I mean, like, sure, possibly false advertising has taken place, so they should for sure investigate that. But if they had just said, hey, it's Proteus and sometimes you can fly into space, the game would have sold way worse, but no one would be pissed. And like, that's kind of always what I assumed the game would be, and I never had a problem with those games. I love Proteus, like, it's an hour and a half long, you walk around in nature, and then you watch the sunset, the Northern Lights, and float away. Like, that's that game. Spoilers. But and weirdly though, on the flip side of all of this, and I hope I'm not just kind of rambling, but like, I think that Dear Esther is a very focused experience, and I think that Gone Home probably has the best narrative of the examples that we've discussed so far, because it's emotionally driven. Your choices do actually kind of sort of make a difference, the order that you look at things, and if you don't find certain things or open certain things, you can miss out on details. When I actually, like, I had a moment with Gone Home very similar to my read on Let the Right One In, the vampire movie, where, like, literally the next day, or like a couple days later, I was thinking about it, and then I had like a realization, and I was like, oh, that's totally different than what I thought was actually going on, and it was just from me thinking about what I'd seen. And I was like, oh yeah, that everything clicks into place now. Like, this thing is what was really going on in the background there. Whereas I think a game like Firewatch, I think also kind of had a little advertising issues because they were being very secretive, and everyone kind of thought that there would be some kind of like supernatural element going on, and like they said Lynchian, I think, at some point, or like Twin Peaks, like weird stuff got mixed in there. And I remember being disappointed because I don't think this counts as a spoiler, but the game is very much kind of just slice of life. And I remember the whole time I was playing that game, I was kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop, and it never does, because that's not what that game is. And I think that I would have been less disappointed in that game if I had known more kind of what I was going in for. Which brings me to the main concern that a lot of people have with games like this, is that $20 seems like a lot for an hour and a half long game, or 4-hour game, especially when you don't quote unquote do anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think some of these games have some of the best art and ideas that are happening in video games. 30 Flights of Loving, or Proteus, or Dear Esther. Some of the best music, some of the best innovation, really interesting ideas are happening, and they happen in these games that are walking simulators. And so I love them personally, because I like to experience these kind of narratives, and I would be really sad if they went away. And I mean, hell, I made a song about them. But it's funny though, because I don't like The Last of Us, right? Because I think I would like The Last of Us more if it was a walking simulator for me, because I don't like the gameplay mechanics in that game. I don't like having to rebuild shivs all the time.
Yes, come to the dark side.
Yeah, I don't like the way combat works in those games. I don't like having to craft items like that all the time. It just gets tedious and kind of boring. And like the gameplay, I mean, everybody talks about ludonarrative dissonance, tra-la-la, but like, you know, the point I really lost faith in The Last of Us was when I was in the city hall and there were just waist-high walls everywhere, and I was like, oh, I'm about to get in a shootout, and then I did.
Yeah.
Because there were a bunch of incongruous crates and little walls everywhere, and I was just like, this is, you know, like, and I actually did like Uncharted 4 quite a bit. I played it on Explorer mode. I wish that Explorer mode took combat out entirely, because it's just tedious. But even in that game, like, it's so funny. Like, I'm getting a little off the beaten path here, but to me, it's like you either go for realism or you go for having a fun game. And if you've got a crate full of grenades and I can see that it's full, but I can't take any more grenades out of it, I'm gonna get annoyed.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Whereas walking simulators, you know, they're not flawless, but
you don't have that dissonance.
Yeah, you don't have that problem. And like, sure, it's a movie that you control. Like, you could boil it down to that. But like, do the critics of walking simulators then assert that movies aren't art?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. The weird thing is, it's like they're complaining about having more on their plate. Like, you know, so you go to buffet and like they give you an extra scoop of something. It's like, oh, why should I have that on my plate? It's like free food. Like, why are you complaining about more food? Like,
right.
I think it also comes from the comparing him to movies. I think it's easier for people to kind of translate stuff in movies because not only do you have like genres of movies, but then you have like your big Hollywood movies and you have like your indies and then you have like your short films. And I think it's hard for people to kind of see it that way in video games because like I mean, walking sims are kind of like short films, right? In a way, we have our indies already and we have our big games, but I think it's people are still trying to figure out that. And also, you were talking about the walking sims. People have a problem with the price. I think that goes into a whole nother discussion for another day of like, you know, what's a game's worth. But I think a lot of times the people who kind of question the value of walking sims never do the opposite and question the value of a $60 game. Like, just because you can play a game for 50 hours, does it still mean it's worth $60? Like,
Oh yeah.
Speaking of Destiny early in the episode, like I kind of felt a little bit salty after I bought Destiny and played it just because mechanically the game's great. The shooting mechanics in the game are second to none. But the rest of the game, there's no narrative. I don't like doing the same thing over and over again. I'm not an MMO guy. I don't like that grind. It's not my thing. And I felt kind of jaded because I was like, I spent $60 on this. I don't think it was worth $60. And then to see like a bunch of their DLCs, like they sell them for $30, and a lot of them are just literally some of the same missions, just remixed or like backwards. I'm like, that's not worth it to me. And you know, Activision's made a lot of weird choices lately, especially with like the COD 4 remaster being tied to Infinite Warfare, and you can't buy it on its own, and you have to buy the $80 version of Infinite Warfare. Super weird. Like, I don't like that stuff. But I always find it weird that people question like the value of indie games or like walking sims, but they never turn it on its head and question the value of these big AAAs or just games that cost $60 in general. And I don't know. I think walking sims are very important to the gaming industry. I think that they allow creativity and they spawn creativity, and I think it helps AAAs or maybe even other indie studios strive to include some of these things in walking sims. And it's all about being immersed, really. I mean, I like playing $60 AAA games that, you know, the mechanics and the gameplay is really good, but a lot of times the story's here or there, really. And walking sims, you're there to be immersed. You know, when you get into a walking sim, you're there to experience it, you know? And I like not having to worry about, quick time events or having to shoot a guy or having to do this. You're just taking it all in and exploring the world. I think it's cool. Honestly, I would love walking sims in worlds that already exist for video games that already exist because it's a different experience in that same world. I would love that. I would absolutely love that.
Dude, can you imagine BioShock Infinite where you didn't have to actually do the combat? Like, just experiencing that world, it would be great.
BioShock, the original walking simulator. That'd be cool.
Or just like a walking sim through Rapture, the night things go down, like before it goes down. That'd be really cool too. And like
where you're just trying to survive, like not. Oh man, that'd be great.
Yeah, or even honestly, I think it would be. I mean, I know people like to consider Gears of War like a very broy game, and it is for most parts. But there are some cool story elements in it. I think it'd be cool to go around that world too. Like, I think the Mad World trailer for Gears of War is still one of the most iconic game trailers ever. Like, when people saw that trailer, people like stopped and paid attention to the TV. They're like, what's going on? You know. But as far as like walking sims, I absolutely love them. Like you said, I think we're both planning on playing Virginia. You know, there's zero dialogue in that game, I believe, or like voice acting. So I'm interested in that. That doesn't turn me off by any means. It actually gets me more intrigued because I'm like, if this game's getting like really good critical reviews, like that means that there's something there. And I think when you strip down a game to the bare essentials, I think it's actually harder to make a really good game. I think people think that it's easier. It's not. You have less things to work with. You have to capture somebody's attention to get them immersed in a world where there's not all these maybe huge collectibles or people talking to you, you know? I think it's a lot more difficult. And I think, I don't know. I just think they're a necessity in the gaming industry. So that's my take on it.
I think without like you said, they are important. Without walking simulators, there wouldn't be so much a push for environmental storytelling and just storytelling in general in games. I think they're really holding up that part of the industry, and so I don't get this hatred for them. I get the fact that you may not want to pay that much for them, but you don't have to. You know, nobody's holding a gun to your head, and
right.
And a lot of these games you get for free on PS Plus or games with gold, and it just doesn't matter. Like, if the games were all garbage and they're really just flooding the industry and like taking up space where a good game could be, then that's different. But I don't think that's the case. I think stuff like Everybody's Gone to the Rapture and games like that, I mean, they really evoke a big emotional response from me when I play them, and so I would never want them to be eradicated from the industry. I just don't see why you hate them so much. I think it's just more classic gamer mentality of, oh, I gotta beat this, I gotta overcome this challenge, I gotta win this game, and
it's not a real game.
Yeah, exactly. That's not what everything's about. Not everything's a race or a competition. So I definitely think they have their place in the industry, and I'm so glad that they're seemingly here to stay. You know, we got Tacoma coming up, and Dear Esther just came to consoles along with Gone Home, so I'm glad to see them here.
Yeah, I think sorry, go ahead, Ian.
Oh, I was just going to say that, I think length and quality versus quantity comes into it too, because, like, I've been more egregiously offended by lengthy games that I feel are wasting my time than a short game. Like even walking simulators that I don't love, like Firewatch, I didn't love it. It only took like 4 hours of my time,
right? And
then I was done. And like, whereas if I was playing Firewatch the shooter, it would have been it could have been the same story but 10 hours long, and it's just kind of funny, like, I don't want to go do a bunch of radio towers. I want to feel something. Like Bound, I played in literally one sitting. I didn't even get up to go to the bathroom, and I loved it. And I cherished that gameplay memory, I don't often feel like that about AAA titles as frequently.
I think too, like, once it comes to like a major saturation point where, I think people who are in the know and people who respect video games understand that they are art. And I think that once it gets to a point where it's a little bit more ubiquitous in that sense and people really respect games as art, I think if there's ever like a major museum, if there's video game museums in major cities, I think you will see walking sims in there because they're very important, and they are probably the largest, outside of just like indie games in general, the largest driving force for true art and expression in video games, and it's awesome. So
sure.
Yeah,